17 years ago, a new Anglican province was born on this continent out of a hope that Orthodox Anglican faith and practice might take root here again. My guest today thinks that hope is potentially in danger, not mainly because of any one person or controversy, but because of something deeper and harder to talk about, the structure itself. He argues that what the ACNA needs is structural repentance, not just of the heart, but of its very form of governance. It's a bold and to some people potentially unwelcome claim, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Matt Wilcoxen, Father Matt Wilcoxen, welcome to the channel.
Thanks, David. It's great to be on, and I'm really looking forward to discussing this piece and hearing some of your thoughts and feedback.
Yeah. So we're going to be discussing your piece on Substack. I believe it was entitled "The Need for Structural Repentance" or something along those lines. I'll link it in the description. But before we get into the essay itself, I want to, for our guests, know a little bit about, for our audience, know a little bit about the person behind it, because a piece like this, I don't think it doesn't come from nowhere. So if you can tell us a little bit about who you are, your Anglican ministry context, and what led you to where you are now. A little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'm a rector in the Diocese of Christ Our Hope. I'm now the rector at the Church of the Incarnation in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is it's an underrated, beautiful, and best part of the American landscape here in the Shenandoah Valley. And so I get to be a rector here at Church of the Incarnation. I've spent 10 of the last 15 years, however, in Australia. I did a PhD in Sydney. I was a youth and young adults minister there, and then I was a rector in the Diocese of Sydney. And then in the middle there, I sojourned in the barren wastelands of Washington, D.C. So I've had a complex journey, and I'm happy now to be settled here in beautiful Harrisonburg.
Yeah. Were you ordained in the ACNA before you went to Australia, or were you ordained in Australia?
So I've done 2 stints in Australia. My wife
Okay.
and I were there for 6 years, and we became citizens. And
Oh, wow.
and then I was confirmed as an Anglican in Sydney, and then I was ordained in Washington, D.C. in the Diocese of Christ Our Hope. But then I went back and did a stint as a rector at an inner city parish in Center City, Sydney.
Okay. Wow. So yeah, vast perspectives from all different kinds of places and experiences, which I imagine informs your piece. So I'm just curious about, obviously this piece, you're kind of, laying some criticisms of the current layout and structure of the province. And I'm curious how that journey was. Did you think more about the ACNA structure as you lived in Australia, or vice versa? What kind of led to the rise of these kind of criticisms, and how they began to kind of crystallize for you?
Yeah. So I do think often our imagination is formed by what we have experienced. And so I sort of had these experiences going back and forth of, the ACNA and the diocese that I'm in, the broader ACNA, and then seeing the way things were set up in Sydney. And in both of those cases, I started to get curious as to, well, how did each of these systems get here, and how do they work more intricately? And so, yeah, I think that comparative, not just kind of on paper comparative analysis, but actually living in one, living in another, has been really helpful to get an outside kind of perspective on this system. And then I think just generally, a thing that we can all do is read history and sort of understand the genealogy of what we're living in, like why it's come about and how.
Yeah. Well, I think that is, I appreciate that your piece comes from. I mean, I know, lived experience can kind of be overused, but you not only, we can compare different models and how they look, but to actually experience it, I think that there's an advantage to that and adds more weight to what you're writing. And so before we get into the actual dissect, your diagnosis and kind of your proposals, I'm curious as to like, why now? Why kind of put this out publicly? Begin to think about our canons and constitutions, and because once you start to lay out some constructive feedback, I'm sure some people will disagree, and you might get misunderstood, and all those different kind of things. So I'm actually curious if there was any deeper reasoning for this moment in time, with the province being 17 years old and kind of still new. So is it new? I guess I don't know, but I'm curious to why now.
The sooner the better, I think. And I think that we are crossing a threshold. We were in I wasn't around. So, and I want to be careful and humble. People may not have thought that about the piece, but I do want to be careful and humble about criticizing the founders. We were an emergency system, and this thing came together. But I think that it's time for us to transition to a more permanent and stable form that is derived from our ecclesiology. And, the emergency is over. Now we're trying to actually build systems, I would hope. And I think that, even the College of Bishops and some of the things they're doing acknowledges that. So I think it's time. And then I also think there's a lot of conflict within the ACNA, and that's not unique to the ACNA. Every system has conflict. Every system has things, but I do think we're experiencing it at a higher level because of some of the ways that we have structured ourselves. So if there's one thing I want to say really clearly is up front, is like, Jesus is our savior, not our polity. But your polity can make your ministry worse. It can incentivize bad things. And I do think that there's some of that where we're making it harder on ourselves because of the way some of these things are structured. And so I love the church. I love the ACNA. I came back from Australia rather than making a life there, partly because I wanted to be an ACNA pastor, and I want to see this thing in 40 years, hopefully, or 50, if I live that long, that had some tiny part of like, look at that thing. It's flourishing and growing, doing well.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, it seems like the pains and the tensions, the question is, are these growing pains, or are they a different kind of pain? And the hope is that they're growing pains into something better, more long lasting.
That's true, but we've got to have a vision of what that better is. I think that's part of the point of the piece.
Yeah,
I got a nickname. I was told Manifesto Matt, which is.
I wish you told me
funny.
That. I would have introduced you that way.
Yeah, if you know me, I'm pretty conservative and moderate as a personality, so it's kind of a flattery. But yeah, we do have to have a picture of what we're aiming at.
Yeah.
So
let's transition, I guess, to the diagnosis. Because you have this underlying diagnosis, this underlying what you would call, I think, disease, perhaps, or something like that kind of permeates into these different examples. So I want to sit in the diagnosis for a while before we get anywhere near solutions, because the whole essay rests on a single arresting move, one you make right there in the title. Repentance is a heart word. It's about person, sin, contrition, turning, but you bolted it onto structural, which I think there's a place for, which is about systems and canons and constitutions. So before we talk about what's wrong, I want to understand that welded together phrase, because I think everything kind of depends from it downstream. So what is the structural sin, I guess? What is the underlying thing that needs to be repented of in your mind?
Yeah. I mean, I want to be clear that I'm using repentance.
And clarify what you mean by it, because it, maybe it's not in a technical way, but more in this. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean repentance in the sense of turning around, going
Yeah.
back, and but it's a metaphor. We're not talking, structures don't sin. Although I do think we always we can always influence our structures with our sin. So for me, the problem, I use this Girardian language throughout the article or in the beginning of mimetic rivalry. I think another way is just to say competition, and the ways that takes hold in a system. And so I think that the way that we have built our ACNA, particularly with the overlapping jurisdictions, it doesn't check competition. It intensifies it. And I can talk about, it's not just bad for the soul. I think through some ways that it makes us worse at safeguarding. It makes us worse at, teaching and preaching the faith. So I think that's the fundamental thing. How do there were pragmatic reasons that we didn't clean this up earlier, but now let's talk about what would it look like to kind of at least move toward ameliorating that sense of competition that's just been baked into the system.
Yeah, so that's the disease. I think you said it. The disease is this the rivalry, the competition.
Yeah.
And it permeates into these different specific examples. You kind of just alluded to it. But let's talk about the different places, some of the different places it shows up in your piece. I want to first talk about where it shows up and discuss those. And then afterwards, we'll talk about what your solutions are. So you point to overlapping jurisdictions, to authority that runs on informal channels, godly admonitions instead of due process, the safeguarding, all these different areas. But I want to talk about the jurisdictional aspect. So tell me how this has showed up. What was the initial intent of these overlapping jurisdictions, these affinity dioceses, as they're called? What are they? Why were they formed? And how do you think that has exacerbated or showed this issue of rivalry?
Yeah, I think, now I wasn't in the room where these things happened, but my understanding is that you wanted to create the biggest possible tent of Anglicans so that we could come together in mission. And so part of that is, there were certain shared things around that we were not going to be doing, primarily things that, related to same-sex marriage and ordination in that regard. And so there was that common thing, but then there was all these other differences. So how do you accommodate all these differences? Well, we'll just kind of create affinity dioceses, will allow, for overlapping. And so that way everyone can kind of have a diocese that works for them. And so, and I'm sure that there's probably been other factors in that, but some of this is on the issue of women's ordination. Some of it's on churchmanship, more Anglo-Catholic. And then I think some of it's just sort of grown and developed more organically. You've got like a more kind of, that's less doctrinal, I suppose. There are groups where dioceses like ours don't have that many former Episcopalians in them, actually. A lot of us are coming in from Presbyterian or Baptist backgrounds. So we're kind of Gentiles grafted in. And so I think there's a bunch of factors that these things have kind of just grown up around each other, but I think causes problems.
And you don't think that there's a way, because I know some people who are fine with, some people say, hey, there's 4 different dioceses represented in this locale. This is a problem. Other people say, well, your whole piece is kind of like we want to fix these things to push the mission forward. Well, some people say, well, aren't there plenty of fish in the sea? Like, why does it have to be that? Why is that necessarily an issue? Everyone is like divide and conquer. Their souls to be saved. How would you respond to that? Because I hear that, I see that on Twitter, and I see that this is a big, there is this tension that people on both sides are kind of bringing forth. How would you respond to that?
I would respond by saying that is one possible way that you could approach this. I don't think it's true to historic. I mean, I have biblical reasons too, but I would certainly say I don't think it's true to Anglican polity. Like, we talk a lot about in the ACNA. There are a lot people seem to really love tradition, and we love the prayer book, and we love liturgy. I hear very few people remarking on how weird our ecclesiology is. Like, this is not normal. This is not there's no other Anglican church in the world that has essentially like a free market, free church ecclesiology. So I would almost say, like, at the point where everyone does their own thing, like, why doesn't every rector just be a bishop? We're using these things like dioceses and parishes and these offices like bishops and rectors, and yet we've divorced them from even any attempt to apply them in the way that they have developed historically. And that's not just in Anglicanism, that's within the church even prior to the Reformation. And you see this practical application of ecclesiology in the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And so I don't think it's small c Catholic ecclesiology. I think we're not living out our ecclesiology in the way we're structured, is how I would say that.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think another angle too is just, the parish model is so crucial for Anglicanism. I mean, England was divided on these parish boundaries, and I find that to be interesting in a town with several dioceses of, like, is this our jurisdiction? Like, how does this work? So it can be very confusing. But with your proposal here, I want to talk about your proposal on how you would, if you were given a clean slate and you can redraw the ACNA, and you do this in your piece. I'm fascinated by your proposal. So do you mind just kind of summarizing what that is and kind of your rationale behind it?
Yeah, I had to go reread it all, so I might not that it's all in my brain, but let me pull it up again, because I want to talk. Just note these 8 planks really briefly, and I want to say too that these planks, in my view, they go together.
Yeah,
there are ways that you can't just pick and choose. There may be a couple that you could take out, and it might still work. There may be, there's things like that. So, but the first thing is ending overlapping dioceses, that we need to kind of figure out a way to redraw the boundaries and create maps of, here's where this is a geographical diocese. This is how it's organized. The second is about a more robust synodical authority. And some of this is something that needs to be dealt with at the canonical level. And some of it is about culture, about how we create synods that aren't just kind of glorified 3-hour business meetings, but actually where real things are debated and proposed, and governance is exercised. And so I think that's really important. I talked about narrowed and clarified episcopal powers in there was another plank.
Yeah.
We can get into this more specifically. I don't want to neuter bishops at all. I believe in the episcopate. But I think that we need to make it clear that bishops exercise an office in accordance with canons. And that they're not exercising personal power. They're exercising the power of an office. One thing in their independent safeguarding, I think that we have a problem that we can make better by taking at least the investigation and prosecution of safeguarding issues completely out of the bishop's hands. Property issues that I know you'll want to get into. Yeah, there's something in there about shadow powers, and then how do we lock in like doctrinal commitments that are going to be, kind of non-negotiable for us. And so they all go together in my mind to create something that I think would be more stable. I do want to be clear. I don't think there's any infallible church system. Like this would not be perfect or guaranteed to be successful forever. But I think it would be more stable. So which one of those do you want to get into most?
Yeah, well, I think the synodical, the redrawing the boundaries, and the bishop's role kind of can all work together. I think those are all kind of related to polity and ecclesiology specifically. So let's just start with let's start with your proposal of diocese, synods, right? Provinces, and then
Yeah,
you kind of add this more local vision, and I would love for you to kind of share that proposal and why you think that's advantageous. So let's start there.
Yeah, I firmly believe, and this is something that was even stated, I believe, at the recent provincial council pretty clearly, that we think the parish church, the local church, is the locus of gospel ministry, and so what we want to avoid, I think, is a system where everything serves an abstracted hierarchy. Instead, we want a hierarchy, if you will, that serves that local mission. And so, I talk in there about the principle of subsidiarity, just that you want to leave as much as you can within, doctrinal boundaries. You want to leave decision making to those who are closest to the ground. And so you want to have your top level needs to be organized very carefully around certain central commitments. And then underneath that and within that, you want to allow dioceses to organize themselves, just as dioceses need to be careful they're not dictating all kinds of certain, things that are going to happen at the parish level. And so it's sort of that devolved authority, but you're letting the people closest to the things make those decisions.
And then, but you have multiple provinces forming, right, within the United States. Your vision is like another layer of hierarchy.
I've thought about that because it does look like a bit of like an extra level, and I think in that I was copying what I saw in Australia, and perhaps it's not necessary. I don't know, so there it's you've got different sort of regions of dioceses that do have that kind of middle level of a province. That's what they would call a province. And then the church, capital C church, is the national body. You could do without that, honestly. I don't think that's an essential part of the proposal.
Okay, so not as essential.
No.
But tied to it is the bishop's role. And I think it's really interesting that rather than what seems at face value is you're trying to take away responsibilities from the bishop, it's actually for a deeper purpose. So how do you feel that bishops have too much or extra biblical responsibility? And what does that hinder bishops from in their ministry?
Yeah. I think I might talk about this a little differently now. So
okay.
I hope that's okay. It doesn't seem like a weasel answer.
No, that's fine.
Because I wrote this, I think late last October, and now it's 8 months later. So I was thinking about this today because I knew you'd ask me about bishops. In some ways, our bishops don't have enough power. And in other ways, they have too much power. And the problem, I think, is that it's vague. Like the church, Episcopally governed churches historically have had a lot of clearly defined canon law about how things work and where their power lies and what they can do. And I think that we have a system where some of it's defined, but a lot of it's underdefined or it's vague. And then we also have this weird thing where this goes back to the overlapping jurisdictions. Your bishop may have this power over you within the diocese, this authority. Let's use that word. It's a better word, less sort of morally charged. Might have authority over you within the diocese. But if your parish doesn't like the exercise of that authority, you can leave. And so how much authority do they really have? So that's one of the things. And then there's this other part of it where we, like the godly admonition that is in our canons, I have found perplexing, because a godly admonition can be issued for almost anything, and then failure to obey it is a prosecutable offense. And so it's like, this is almost like carte blanche for this bishop to make anything an issue of absolute importance that you must obey them on. And then if you don't, that in and of itself is something that you could be charged for as a clergy. So we have a really weird system where there's the rivalry and competition that means the bishop's always worried about like how to keep you happy, you and your parish. And I do think that influences a lot of what goes on, not explicitly, but implicitly. But then also you see situations where bishops appear to, exercise attempt to intervene in situations that are really not things that I think they should. So, yeah.
Yeah. So
does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking more that is one angle, but I think you're also hitting on, just because the canons aren't as clear, there's a lot of assumed responsibilities that bishops have beyond what it seems like the pastoral epistles, command when it comes to safeguarding or administration. And I think you're kind of touching on that a little bit as well. Or do you still see it that way?
Yeah, I do. And yes. I'll let you ask.
What does it hinder them from, I guess? Because I think that's actually the beautiful thing underlying it, is that you're not just like complaining about something or pointing out something, but it's because of a deeper, you want bishops to be bishops. And I just wanted to hear what you think, the main role of a bishop should be, and what it hinders them potentially from doing.
So I want bishops to, so what I would really like to see is that we have bishops who have the best chance of enforcing and teaching robustly the church's doctrine, disciplining those clergy that commit canonical offenses without fear or favor, and not disciplining those clergy who have not committed, things. So I think the bishop has a really tough role, but the bishop is the person who's guarding who gets into the clergy in the first place. And then the bishop has to enforce the church's doctrine and practices on those clergy. And I think that particularly in that safeguarding role, we have a problem. And I want to see bishops more empowered to do that in a way that's healthy. And I'll explain. So I don't know, there's all kinds of issues that people have talked about in the ACNA, but you don't have to know the specifics of any of them to see the kind of dynamics that go on in these things. If there is a clergy person who has done wrong or ought to be sort of maybe inhibited or prosecuted or something, but doing so might upset that parish or that set of parishes, and you might lose them and you might lose that income. That's in the bishop's mind in this system that is built on transferable dioceses. Similarly, if you have a clergy person who has stood up faithfully in a tough situation and has a lot of people upset with them, and there's a mob online saying we've got to get rid of this person, and you've got other clergy in the diocese, and it becomes this thing. So it's in that bishop's mind as the pragmatics of how do I hold this all together and deal with these competing interests. And what I would like to see is bishops have stable systems so they can be godly, by the book, and do their jobs.
I think that's a really helpful connection of why we need to have why that connects well to the jurisdictional thing.
Yeah.
If churches, in the back of one's mind, well, this church can just leave or vote to leave, then that certainly makes things more difficult to do pastoral ministry. I think that's a really helpful connection there that ties those together. I mean, the obvious elephant in the room of all of this, I think, is the doctrinal. It's hard to talk about overlapping jurisdictions without talking about the doctrinal aspects of why this happens in the first place. Because yes, there's churchmanship issues, but obviously, and you mentioned this, and we all know this in the ACNA, is that women's orders is a big part of the ACNA. I think the overlapping jurisdictions, getting to be under a bishop whom you agree with, is kind of a defining feature of the ACNA in many ways. I think that's a key component of the ACNA. But you're not neutral on this. You resolve holy orders, you have a view on it. So I'm curious, you mind sharing what that view is? Then I have some follow-up questions, I guess, for what that might actually look like, because everybody has opinions on it. Not everybody knows what to do with their convictions. And I'll just say this for the listeners. That Holy Orders Task Force in 2017, it says explicitly, like, both positions cannot be right and we need to move forward. So that is the telos of coming to a resolution is embedded in that document. So we have to push forward, and your proposal is one proposal. So I'm just curious what you wrote about and what you're thinking on that line.
I mean, and I want to acknowledge, like, this is the place where our doctrine at some level influences all of our thinking, I would hope, about structures and things. But this is the one place where the document veers into very contested territory. So conceivably, I think someone could have these 8 planks, and then that other plank, they could take the opposite view. And I think, in my view, that this would still be a coherent sketch. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, but either way. But I felt like you couldn't sketch out this kind of reform without somehow taking a position on this issue. And so what I did, and I didn't argue for it a lot in there, was articulate the position I hold and the position of the diocese that I'm in. And so just cards on the table. It's certainly, that's very debatable in terms of, well, why did you do that? And that gets into a whole other kind of set of non-structural questions. But I don't think that it's tenable to, well, let me put it this way. I don't think you can settle the overlapping jurisdiction question without having a settlement on this.
Yeah.
And because I think the overlapping jurisdiction question is so irregular, I don't think I think it's deleterious and harmful to us. So it's like, you can't settle it, though, without coming to a settlement on this. And so my position, I hold to a traditional understanding of that, every Anglican and Roman Catholic and Orthodox has held on the priesthood prior to the first woman priest in the Anglican tradition was 1944. So I do believe that is the biblical Catholic understanding of priestly orders. And so to me, that is, and then there's a practical side of this. Well, why would you do that? Well, the vast majority of the churches that we have, even in dioceses that do ordain women as priests, are led by male rectors, and so just practically speaking, this would seem to me to be the most workable position and settlement for us to adopt.
So it's both your conviction, but also you see it as a compromise position potentially with the lay of the land.
It's not a compromise if you're for women's ordination of the priesthood. Yeah. I mean, and I think that has to be said fairly. Like, this is if that is your view, this would be a big loss.
Yeah.
And, a piece like this is meant to generate discussion. If someone has a much better way to achieve, I still hold my view and I will articulate for it robustly, but if someone has a better way, I'm not opposed. So like when I was in the Diocese of Sydney, that diocese had a unified position on orders. The Diocese of Melbourne, the Diocese of Brisbane, different positions. And that did inhibit communion to some extent, but the province still worked because those had evolved within a geographical system. But we don't have that. And so even to get to the point of having a province that can tolerate diversity means having the system set up. But to set the system up, you got to have a settlement to reestablish it. So,
yeah. And you say in this, and this, I think this question ties to this particular issue. And I guess I have a question on what in your mind. I know you're not laying it as a blueprint. It's trying to start a conversation.
Yeah.
But you lay these, immutable doctrinal kind of positions that in this hypothetical world, they're untouchable. Excuse me. And that's the 1662 and the 2019 Book of Common Prayer, the Jerusalem Declaration, the 39 Articles, and then specifically this view of women in holy orders. In this world where, let's say, all the mechanics happen for it to change, do you see a place where, like, similarly, my friends who are ordained in the PCA, they can make an exception, a good faith subscription where they can make an exception to certain parts of these, doctrinal standards? Like, is there a world where a male presbyter who is for the ordination of women theologically can, say, I hold to this immutable doctrine, but where I exempt myself is on this point? Or do you see it as, if you believe this, you will be, tough. This is tough, but this is the dividing kind of line? Because I'm sure there's, even with this proposal, there's many ways this is can look. Or an Anglo-Catholic who says, I disagree with this article of the 39 Articles. What do you think of something like that, of the mechanics of that?
That's a good question. So my thought is that there ought to be room for someone's private scruples or divergence. Now, what does that look like? I think the way that works best is that you make room for that within a highly principled, structured system. And so it's like, if you're happy, so you're telling us, you're being honest with us about what your principles are, we're going to tell you where the boundaries are. If you're happy to abide by those boundaries, and we take your objection in good faith and your commitment to abide with, then yes. So come on in. Now, the caveat to that, though, is I think we should take the belief seriously, though. So
yeah.
If you have something on the books and yet you're just putting personnel in places constantly who uphold it but don't actually believe it, like, it's not going to be on the books soon. And so I want to steer a middle ground. Like, you can allow some divergence, but you've only if you're actually really actively principally principled in a principled manner, like teaching and upholding it. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with that. But it has to be like we're a tolerated minority, and that could, again, someone could propose that, and we could debate it if they, want to make me a tolerated minority. There are systems that could work that way, but the idea that you're just sort of doing both doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I had a previous guest, Dr. Seth Snyder, Reformed Episcopal Seminary, and he wrote a piece for North American Anglican of just proposing a theological center. Like, we need some kind of center so that we can define who is the minority position. It seems like there's a vacuum for that on many different things: worship, prayer book expressions. Well, maybe not prayer book expressions, but worship style and theology, Anglo-Catholic, low church. Like, it's just like still feels like the Wild West. So I think that you're pointing to, this is broader than just holy orders. We need to actually live up to the fundamental declarations of the province. And I think sometimes, I'm curious if you feel that way. It feels like that's on paper, but I don't know how that's actually really being executed.
Yeah. And look, 17 years is like a millisecond in ecclesiastical time. So we're still at the beginning of this. And I think we need to have the debates. We need to have the debates out in the open, in healthy ways.
Yep.
Because that's how we're going to make our way toward some kind of settlement.
Why do you think there's a hesitancy to have these conversations? Like, I think your Substack piece, part of why I'm interviewing you, is like, whoa, like, someone's having a robust proposal here. And it feels rare. And, people have their one-liners on Twitter or their complaints, or they hyperfixate on just one issue, like holy orders. But why do you think that there's just not a lot of kind of robust conversation starters out there?
I think people are afraid that doing that will cause the whole thing to split. And I kind of believe the opposite. Well, or I at least believe this: if it's going to split because there's disagreement on these things, that's going to happen. Like, you don't avoid something. You don't make something better by avoiding it. The best chance to like heal a rift or to come to a settlement is to talk about it. And I think what we do out of anxiety to avoid, losing control or we peacemonger, everyone just get along. And it's like, that doesn't actually achieve real peace. And so I think the best thing for us is to put our principles on the table and discuss it, and not just like theoretically, like say, no, I really think we should do this, and then argue about it and, politic in a holy way, like right out in the open, and have debates and have votes and organize, like do it. I actually think that's better than peacemongering, what I think Edwin Friedman calls peacemongering. So
sometimes we need to agree to disagree for a point in time.
Yeah, and I felt a strange thing where I realized, like, it feels like I'm not allowed to name out loud that I have this traditional position, even though that's like what my diocese thinks. Like, that's supposed to be acceptable, and I can't speak for anyone else. It's like, well, there's some kind of unhealthy dynamic if you're completely within the bounds, but you don't feel like you're able to advocate for this. And so I just think putting things out in the open.
Yeah. If dual integrities is to be lived out, then both parties should be able to discuss their views out in the open. My previous guest, I asked him the question, what is his hope for the ACNA? And he said, well, we got to figure out the women's orders thing. And someone I didn't say my, I was just, someone says like another man like telling women what to do, and I'm like, this is not productive. Read the Vancouver statement of what the College of Bishops said. Like we have to have conversations on both sides, or the people who are very traditional and they don't want to be part of the ACNA and have a schismatic attitude. And they're like, I don't want to be a part of that group. It's like, we got to sit in the room and talk. So anyway, I just echo what you're saying, that we need to have those conversations. Tied to
it's
this,
great that you're,
go
it's
ahead.
great that you're having, by the way, kudos to you for facilitating really interesting, good discussions. So,
I mean, that's just the goal to because if you're in your own silo, your own diocese, your own parish, like these are conversations that I just would hope people can get exposed to, and that it can create a kind of environment where we are talking out in the open and with charity. And that's, I think, that's the baseline. Can we just have these conversations with charity, not assuming the worst intentions? But my question is related. I think the building question is really interesting. That's my last one before we kind of conclude here and talk about kind of your concluding remarks in your piece. But I think the building one, I think that your proposal is that buildings should be in a trust between the parish and the diocese, and that buildings, the parish right now, currently, I think parishes own the buildings and they can use that as leverage. And we've touched on how, because they own the rights to the building, they can leave at any point. But for anyone who was in the Episcopal Church, there was some deep pain there with how the Episcopal Church, took advantage of that trust in many ways and made people's lives miserable. And I think rather than talking about the trust itself in your proposal, I think the deeper issue that I wanted to hit on is how much longer time do people need to kind of, heal from the crazy circumstances of what happened at the beginning of the 2000s, end of the 90s. How much time do we give people to kind of heal from that? And we go like, okay, that happened, but this is our history. This is our ecclesiology. These are our principles. Like, we can't build our governance based on maybe the trauma of this emergency situation. Because I think that's the question, but under your piece, or the bigger issue, like, they built the plane as they were flying it. When is the plane going to land and we go to the factory and rebuild it? I think that's the big question. And I think that's where the disagreement is like, no, that was still really recent. And I wasn't there. I was, I'm a Zoomer. So I think that's the interesting thing as a young guy coming in. I'm like, I don't know. You guys have to figure this out. I don't know how much time you need for the dust to settle.
Well, two things. Generally, like, I was not around for that. I was not an Episcopalian. I've never been part of the Episcopal Church. I'm 42. So, I want to recognize that. The other thing is, the thing I put in there was a sketch, and you get the principle. It's like, we want to find a workable way that you're not just kind of ready to leave at any point and opt out of the diocese, but we also don't want the opposite. So I don't know, and lawyers and other people need to kind of talk about what mechanisms might be possible. To your broader point, I suspect that the first generation of leaders are always going to have that kind of trauma. But it's more like, what's the second and third generation of leaders who can get some distance on it, and that traumatic experience is sort of secondhand to them, I think, and that's just going to take time. I think it's just going to take time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people like you, are not. You're able to ask some questions that are just off limits around this area because of how it was before. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions that is a deeper question in terms of moving forward. So I want to kind of, you explicitly say that, you're not giving a blueprint. You say further work must be done to prescribe in detail. Fair enough, but a skeptic will tell you that's the exact sentence where every reform quietly dies, like, here's my dream. But I want to set the details aside. What does this vision commit you to in principle? Like, what has this done for you to kind of explicitly imagine a future governance structure for the ACNA? Like, what has that done for you? What action steps have you taken? What does it commit to you in principle? I'm curious. Maybe in Tulsa or something. I don't know.
So what I would like to, I think a first step, a very simple first step would be that we stop proliferating overlapping jurisdiction. And that could just look like, how do we just stop doing this? Like where we are now, we don't have to unwind everything right now, but like, let's just stop making the problem worse. Let's define geographical boundaries for these dioceses. Let's, what steps can we take to just slow the growth of this structural cancer? That would be one of them. What does it commit me personally to? I think I want to create debate, and I want to try to model this kind of churchmanship, if you will. So I got voted onto the provincial council, and I went to Tulsa, and there was, a big Title IV revision that went through and passed. And we thought that there was at least one very easy to fix deficiency in that Title IV. And so we gathered a group together and did some politicking, but it was all above board. It was, this is who we are. This is what we want. This is what we've done. And it was within the rules. And, it was a new thing. I think that someone had tried to do this from the floor in a canonical manner. I made a speech. People debated against it. I made a response. I lost the vote. I think I won the debate, but lost the vote. And I think that was just, I'm trying to put myself out there, hopefully not at all in personal. It doesn't really gain me anything. If anything, it just causes stress and people look at you weird, but trying to say like, hey, let's do synod. Let's do synod here. Let's not just kind of rubber stamp stuff that comes from the bishops, or God bless them, and they are good men. But so, yeah.
What does good faith politicking look like? I see, petitions. I don't think those work on both sides. I'm wondering if that's the next step for some both lay and ordained in the ACNA is to learn, because if you're coming, as you said, we're all grafted in. Like if you're coming from a non-denominational background, there's no place to really politic. It's like there's the pastor, and that there's less of those mechanisms, and I think people don't know even how to use them. What would you say is a good start for good faith politicking? Based on the mechanisms that are at hand?
Yeah. I think participating in your diocesan synod in meaningful ways, connecting with like-minded people within your diocese. And I think doing it in a way that is open about your principles and what you believe and what you're coming together around, and talking about the things that are on the table or the things that might be possible. What's that famous phrase, like politics is the art of the possible? Clearly some aspects of my proposal are not possible, but so what is possible and how might we work together to accomplish it? And I just think the good faith part is not doing that in devious or underhanded ways. Doesn't mean everyone's going to like what you're trying to accomplish, but you're doing it in an honorable, open, way that appeals to Scripture and people's reason and sort of practical possibility.
Yeah.
So I think networking. I think creating networks of common cause that are run adjacent to our synods and our councils is healthy if they're done the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really helpful kind of thing to just talk about, because there's so much despair or there's no point. And it's like, no, like there are mechanisms, and we are a very new province. And so if there is possibility for change, it's definitely when you're still in seed form.
Well, here's a really good one. If you're interested in this, whether you're clergy or lay, just read the stuff. Just start by reading it. So when the Title IV thing was happening, and they were saying there are no amendments from the floor, and that's true. So there was no the rules don't allow amendments to a canonical. If there's a motion to amend the canons, there can be no amendments to that motion from the floor. Totally true. But I read the rules and I saw, well, yeah, that's true. But what's also true is you could have a separate motion, your own motion to amend the canons. And so it struck me as how many people, when we were saying, well, this is what we want to do, we want to put up our own motion, we copy and paste their text, we change the one little part, we put that up, and then it's a superseding thing, and we can choose between the two. And people were like, there's no you can't amend. And I said, and it was just so clear once you read the rules, like, oh, there is a way to do this. So read the rules, read the canons, like, know this stuff. I suspect that 75% of clergy and 90% of lay people don't want to get into this. And like, that's probably fine. But for those of us who feel called and burdened, this stuff is important, and you need to read the canons and learn them and learn the rules of order, and be a nerd, get into it.
Yeah, I mean, my pushback would be, I guess, I don't know I think you should care about it, whether you like it or not. Like, these are the canons and constitutions you make an oath to hold up.
I agree. I just know that there are some of us who have more of a bent toward enjoying knowing about it, and others who are going to do the minimum, I hope.
Sure. So. Yeah, no, totally. And I need to read them myself and get more acquainted. Well, Father Wilcoxen, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, my hope is that these conversations continue. I think 17 years is enough time to maybe newer generations to talk about these things and just have open conversation. I appreciate that piece you wrote in October, for me, and I think for many others, was the first example of, we're allowed to like write about this, like we can talk about this, like here's a vision. And I agree with what you said. Like, if someone disagrees, what's your vision? Lay out your vision, and let's have open conversations about what the ACNA could look like. So I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time. I guess my last closing, as we close, is there anything else that you'd like to say about your piece or anything like that?
I'm just honored that you were willing to discuss it. And I just want to reiterate like how much I love, like it's coming out of a place of love and wanting, I think I say this in there, like I believe that the ACNA has and could have a key role to play in the future of American Christianity, which is important for world Christianity. And so I think we are just a small little denomination, but I think we have this Anglican heritage that is so beautiful and amazing, and I want to see it flourish. So that's where this is all coming from for me.